infinite complaisance, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
In the foothills of the Colorado Rockies outside Denver in Golden, sits a wellness center unlike any other, offering the latest holistic technologies for optimizing health and an in-house medical director offering PRP, stem cell treatments, and more. Plus, they offer PEMF, red light therapy, biocharger frequency healing, neurofeedback, whole body vibration, NanoV, and so much more. Check out their website at www.goldenbiohack.com. That's golden, BIOHACK.com to schedule a phone consultation and get outside the box good health that's as unique as you are. First of all, you are one of my patron members. Thank you so much for that. And early on, when I was kind of welcoming you to Patreon, I should say, and giving you all your Patreon info, you mentioned that, and I quote, "There's a lot of strange in my family," is what you said. So where do you think we should begin with that stuff, Mike?
I guess the earliest strangeness happened when I was around probably about 4 or 5 in this kind of haunted house in Riverside, California. The only thing before that was when I was about 3, I got really sick, and I ended up getting what's called riot syndrome and was in the hospital for quite a while and almost died. And shortly after that, we ended up moving to this house in Riverside, California. I loved it because it felt like it was a bigger house, more room to run around. But even then, I remember my brother or my sister asking my mom, who's in the kitchen? My mom would just kind of brush it off, say, "Oh, what are you talking about? There's nobody in the kitchen. There's nobody here." You would be in the living room and you would be, I don't know, like watching TV. I was coloring, doing little stuff like that. And then something I was using would not be where I put it. It would be 5-10 feet away from me. So like either a pencil, a pen, crayon. So little things started happening like that. The biggest of things was at one point, my sister would wake up in the middle of the night screaming. Her room was down the hall. It was the first room as you walked into the hall, but compared to my mom's and dad's master bedroom and my bedroom, she was all the way down the hall from us. But she would wake up screaming, and it would wake us up. I know my parents would go down the hallway and go into her room. And then there would be times that she would go and sleep in my mom and dad's bed. Come to find out, she would wake up because she would hear noises in her room, and on her door would appear these hands. And they were like creepy. She said they were like creepy, long-fingered hands. And they would just appear on the door like she couldn't explain it. And then the biggest night was she was awakened and she was pulled off the bed. And not only was she pulled off the bed, but she felt the fingers wrap around her ankle, and they had long nails on them. And so I believe my mom had called to get some blessings done inside the house. After the blessings, my sister said that everything was great, and that one night she woke up and she saw what she thought was a face of Jesus on the door. And so it was very kind of a powerful moment for her. And she knew she felt safe, but her room was safe, but still other things would happen in the house. Dishes would rattle in the cupboards. Things would go missing. And I joke around with my parents a lot, but back in the 80s, there used to be this little device that someone made. But anyways, you would whistle and it would beep. And so you would attach that to like your keys. My parents would lose their keys somehow, even though they would come in, they'd have the keys, they put them in like a bowl on the table. For some reason, they'd go to grab them to go somewhere, either to work or wherever, and they'd be gone. So they would be whistling. The little thing wasn't, you had to be kind of at least within 10 feet for it to work. And sometimes you whistle and you wouldn't hear nothing. So you'd have to go around the house and whistling until you finally found the keys. And the keys would be in places that they would not have put the keys. So it was a very strange house.
And they would lose the keys so many times that's what in turn made them get this device where they whistled and then the keys would essentially beep for them.
Yes.
Wow.
Yep. Like if they put them in the bowl, and then at the time my parents both worked for what was called Hughes Aircraft in Fullerton, California. And so they'd have to get up super early, like 3 a.m. and get us up and go to the babysitter so they can go to work. They'd get up to go, and the keys were not there, and they could not explain that. And I remember them getting those devices, and it would, as a little kid, I was the youngest of my between my brother and sister and I just remember whistling all the time because I would be the helpful little kid trying to help find my parents' keys. But it wasn't until years later that I put two and two together, why they wanted it, why they bought that device, and what was really going on. And it was, things were just being misplaced and put in different areas. So it was a very, very strange house. I even had nightmares of this witch that would fly around outside my bedroom, cackling and screaming and just laughing. I would go to the windows and close the shades. I would hear tapping on the window, so then I'd go to the window, and it was one of those old shades that you have to pull down and then pull down so that it can go back up. And I remember barely touching the shade, and it would fly up, and this witch would be like right in my face in the window, and I'd wake up. I had that nightmare for years and years. Even as an adult, for whatever reason, I'd have that dream. And it's still vivid today as it was when I was 5, 6 years old. And it's all from that house.
And this may be a very movie conceptualized idea of a witch, but when you talk about these recurring nightmares about the witch outside your bedroom, and then I'm thinking about the creepy hands that eventually pulled your sister right off the bed, but you also mentioned that they were long fingers with nails on them. Do you think that, somehow It was interacting with you in this way with the nightmares and interacting with her in that way, in a much more physical way, and it was essentially the same entity?
I believe now that yes. I believe it's one and the same. For years, and my sister probably still believes, she felt it was a demon or something demonic with long nails that grabbed her foot, and it forever changed her because she, like millions of other people in the world, refused to sleep with her feet over the edge of the bed or outside the covers.
Can't blame her. Smart girl.
Yeah. But for me, I'm the opposite. I like my feet over the edge of the bed, and I'm just, I don't know, maybe it's not so much of a no fear. It's just, I don't know, I guess comfortability. But for her, she's, because of that, I think if I had the same issue or same instance that she did, I probably wouldn't do that. But I kind of put 2 and 2 together that maybe there's some correlation there between those nightmares and then what she went through. And it's kind of stuck with me for quite a while.
And I think it's also pretty cool that your parents were not in denial at all about the fact that something was going down in that house. And then, in fact, them actually getting the blessing done and all of that. But what were they saying around all of this time, like prior to the blessing and then, post, when your sister said, oh, well, I essentially saw the face of Jesus on the door instead of the hands, and she felt comforted. What were your mom and dad saying about all this stuff?
My dad, him and my dad's side of the family, they don't believe in that kind of stuff. They don't believe in the unexplained. They don't believe. They believe that there is an explanation for everything. But my mom's side of the family is very spiritual. They have had experiences throughout their entire life. It was common, I guess you could say, or the best way I can put it. So my mom, as calmly as she could put it, she was, I felt open with talking about things. I even remember as a family watching late night television, and one of the things we watched together was Unsolved Mysteries. And if they always had something, either paranormal, UFO, aliens, cryptids, there was always something on there. I never got the impression from my mom that, oh, yeah, that's not real. It was more so of, yes, this happens. It is real.
So I know at the time you were quite young. You said around 4 or 5. You're not thinking with the same brain that you would now if you lived in a house like that. But do you ever remember them mentioning anything about previous owners, previous tenants, anything that may have gone on to have these kinds of happenings going on? Or do you feel like, and I might know the answer to this already, but I wanted to ask it just in case, and I'm just saying that because I already kind of know what's coming later, but do you think it was more attached to you guys, or it really did have something to do with that house?
As a kid, so I have an eidetic and photographic memory. I can remember everything since I was 2 years old. So there's it's kind of a weird thing in that I remember specific clothing. I remember specific conversations, people, things, this and that. And I remember at the time as a kid that the feeling was, this is real, this is normal, this has happened in our family, and that it was kind of like not so much a ignore it and move on. It was more so of, okay, you know it's real now, so you know that you need to be good. You need to do your homework. We did attend church every Sunday, and so the feelings then were that we need to continue to be good, and stuff like this won't happen. As an adult, looking back on everything and hearing stories throughout my life, and then more so recently after my older brother's passing last year, I'm kind of starting to see a correlation between what my mom has recently said and what happened back then. And so I'm kind of trying to, I guess, comprehend if there is some kind of correlation that things are actually possibly more simple in a sense.
And again, I'm very sorry about your brother. We were talking about that on Patreon, so I'm so sorry about that. So you do feel like, especially with some of the things that you've learned recently, that it's simple in the way that, like, it's just tied to your family, you mean?
Yes. I believe that I know that my family and we consider ourselves sensitive, or in some cases empaths. Now, I believe that anybody who's experienced anything paranormal wise, they are sensitive, especially if they continue to have such experiences. And so I think that in a weird sense, the paranormal has kind of brought my family closer to each other because we believe so much in it, because we have seen things, felt things, and so forth. But after my brother had passed, the day of his funeral, everything was done. We went back to my mom and dad's house, and my uncle had came down from California for the funeral. And we're sitting at the kitchen table. They had moved into the living room, which is like 2 feet from the kitchen table. My uncle had asked what I was up to, because it had been years since I've seen him. And I had just explained to him about my current work situation, and then that I was involved in the paranormal community, been on a few investigations and so forth, and was on a couple shows, one of which was in production but might not see the light of day. And then him and my mom started going into all this paranormal stories that I have never heard of. It just blew my mind. Of all the stories they were telling, which ranged from a little ghost boy, and some ghosts in their attics as a kid, jumping around, walking around, running around. The biggest one to me was my mom had mentioned a story that my great-grandma, her mom's mom, was somehow cursed by a witch. And I remember I stopped what I was doing at the kitchen table, and I was like, what? Could you say that again, Mom? What did you just say? She was like, yeah, your grandma. And she meant to say your great-grandma. She was cursed by a witch. She had frogs in her stomach. They were going, my brother or my uncle and my mom were going back and forth telling this story about how their great-grandma, or their grandma, my great-grandma, she became sick and she couldn't eat. and she was in pain all the time, and there was sounds coming from her stomach, and it sounded like a frog. And it was just like ribbiting, like ribbit, ribbit. And I'm like, are you serious? They took her to a doctor, and this was in Tucson, Arizona, back in the 50s and 60s. They took her to a clinic. They couldn't find nothing wrong with her. So they believed that she was cursed by this witch. The details are a little fuzzy, but from what she told me was in order to try and help their great-grandmother, my grandma somehow contacted through some other people another witch to try and remove this curse. And so they were told in advance what they needed to do. And so I guess they went into one particular room in the house. They cleaned it up. They got the space ready. There was heavy curtains on the windows. And so they were waiting for this witch to show up. They were in the room, and then they started hearing chanting. And they were all looking at each other. It was like my uncle, my mom, my grandma, and my great-grandma, I think, was down the hallway. And so they kept hearing this chanting and just this woman just speaking tongue. And so they walked into the hallway like, where's that coming from? And they went down to the master bedroom when my great-grandma was laying in bed, kind of half asleep, and the witch was in the house. And she was performing whatever ritual on my great-grandmother. And they couldn't explain how she got in the house because the front door was locked. There was no doors unlocked. There was no windows unlocked. But this witch was already in the house, in the master bedroom, performing a ritual on my great-grandmother. And so they were freaked out. But whatever she did, it worked because there was no more frogs in her stomach. And it's the wildest thing I've ever heard my family ever say in my entire life.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. How do you begin to explain how she would get into a locked home and get by these people to get down to the bedroom that your great-grandma was laying in? That's insane.
Yeah, they were dumbfounded. Like, even when I specifically asked Mom, when she got done and she was leaving, what happened? And I was trying to ask her a question, not leading her into her thinking too much, that her just answer what I just asked. And she's like, well, she got done, and then we all walked to the front door, and she left. I go, okay, when you got to the front door, do you remember anything specific? She was like, yeah, we unlocked it, we let her go, and she walked out, and we didn't see her again. And I'm like, okay, you just said it right there. Someone unlocked the door for her to leave. So the door was locked. So it made no sense, because even if it was unlocked and she came in, why would she then lock it? So it dumbfounds me, on top of the whole frogs in the stomach. So it makes me think, at least in Latin culture, the way some people feel that they are cursed, that when they think that they have lifted said curse, that it's not actually lifted. So I now go back to that story, and I think of what happened as a kid in the house that we lived in. It makes me think if, said curse had, traveled to different generations of the family.
Yeah,
And
so it wasn't
witch
lifted. Maybe
related.
it just transferred to you guys, essentially.
Yeah, that's what I think. And it's just it's weird. It's weird to me, and I just now I'm trying to correlate it. Certain things that my sister has said over the years about that incident as a kid, and then my mom telling me that story, and it makes sense to me that maybe they're one and the same. Maybe they're somehow related. So I started to do some research.
Sorry. Before I forget, did your great-grandmother feel better after this ritual?
Apparently she did. The frogs went away and she got better. I don't remember exactly when she had passed, but it was many years after that, probably at least 20, 30 years later she had passed. So apparently she was fine from what my mom had told me.
And was there any idea why someone would put a curse on your great-grandmother?
So my mom believes that back in those days, I guess there was dance-off competitions within the local community where people would go and dance off. But apparently there was some boy that the great grandma had liked or something or another. She started dating, and this was before her and my great grandfather got together. But some weird girl in her class didn't like her, and she believes that the curse was because of that girl. The girl was just weird, and she gave off some type of vibes back then. So they believe that it was some type of curse or hex or something from this other girl. And that's all they could remember, because that went further back before even they were born. And the way my grandma would talk about certain things, paranormal wise, but for the most part, she was very quiet. And I believe she's that type of person of, let's not talk about it, and let's not feed it any more than what it needs. And so she was very quiet about stuff like that.
Yeah, I guess after going through that whole witch frog incident, that might help to kind of get that sort of thinking going and cement that maybe it's best just to let the sleeping dogs lie. Like, if nothing's going down that doesn't need to be addressed, let's not chat about it.
Yeah, I believe that's exactly the impression that stuck, and it continued on for years and years. It stuck with my grandma well after her mom had passed, and it wasn't until I became a teen that she would be more open of little things that have happened to her. And then after telling the stories, it was like, let's quickly change the subject and let's not talk about it again.
Yeah, I could definitely see that being the case. Especially when you've actually got somebody that has somehow just apported or materialized or shown up in your house through a locked door, and you were expecting them, but you were expecting a knock and then to let them in like most normal people. So where did they find this witch that performed this ritual, seance, whatever you want to call it, on your great grandmother? Where did they find this lady?
I'm unsure of that at this point, because my mom was still young and my uncle were young, so they remember the height of that incident and being there, but they don't remember how my grandma, their mom, had gone about trying to find some witch within the local community to come in and remove this hex or curse.
Yeah. No worries.
From her.
No
Yeah.
worries. Just wondering on that one, because that's I'd say that's a different section of the classifieds than we're used to, right? So.
Mm-hmm.
Although if you get on Craigslist nowadays, I'm pretty sure you can find just damn near about everything. There might be a witch section, like a lifting curse section on there now. So what kinds of other happenings would be going on with you or your family after? I mean, so you're sitting at the table, your mind is blown. I remember you saying that on Patreon. You're like, mine was totally blown. Which, how could it not be, right? So. What other kinds of things did you find out then, or what happened after that for you guys?
Other stories they told, and I have, I did a quick recording of them that I can barely hear unless I turn up the volume on it. But they talked about, my uncle talked about how there's this little boy that would run in between the houses. And it would be late at night. And so my uncle had mentioned something of like tapping on his window, and he'd go to the window and there'd be nobody there, but he would see a shadow of a little boy. And so he'd go and tell my grandpa, and my grandpa would be like, there's nobody out there. It's late at night. There ain't no little boy out there. And my uncle would tell him, yes, there is. And so he remembers them going outside and looking around, and there was nobody out there. They were walking in between the houses, going back to the front, and they heard walking and shuffling behind them. And so they turn around and nothing would be there. So they'd start walking again. They'd hear shuffling again. And this time they turned around and they saw like a little boy. And he was like ducking somehow from either a side of the house or a wall. And my grandpa would be like, hey, who's that? And he'd go back down there and there was nothing there. And so my grandpa would say, did you see the boy? And my uncle would say, yeah. He was about this tall, about as tall as me. He looked like this. And my grandpa was like, yep, that's him. And so they go back to the front of the house and they'd wait. And my grandpa then saw a hand come around like the side of the porch, almost like as if grabbing it to like kind of move their body and peek, but there was no peek. So he'd get up to go walk to that corner of the house or the porch, and there'd be nothing there. And so that continued on and on for, I guess, quite a while until they moved. But they actually lived in another house that was very haunted, in that dishes would rattle, things would go missing, but they would hear things in the attic as if something was running around and then sliding. And they'd go up in the attic and there was nothing up in there. So they couldn't explain it. And they would hear talking. They couldn't make out what was being said, but they would hear talking within the house, and they couldn't explain where it was coming from. So these were stories that I did not know of. I've heard some stories here and there throughout my life that they encountered, but I didn't know it went this far back to when they were kids. And so it was kind of glad to know that, like, I'm not fully weird, although I embrace my weirdness of being in the paranormal community, I guess.
Well, that activity in that home sounds nearly spot on to the activity that you mentioned in your Riverside home.
Yes, it does.
That running and sliding noise in the attic is kind of unique. You hear about walking or running, but the run plus the slide is kind of weird.
Yeah, I would think, it's always I consider myself a paranormal enthusiast rather than investigator, even though I've investigated locations and with even with like paracelebs. But an investigator part of me is like, hey, was there stuff in the attic? Was there boxes? Was there stuff moved? I want to ask them all these different questions, but it was so far when they were kids that they're not going to remember as much. But I do recall my uncle saying that there was nothing in the attic. It wasn't a typical, hey, let's store our stuff up in the attic. So if it was empty, then all there would be, like, say, if an animal broke in, you would hear, like, there's a specific way that there's possibly an animal in your house or attic, as opposed to somebody walking, somebody running back and forth, something dragging something across the floorboards. And they said that my grandpa went up there and there was nothing there. And they couldn't explain it. And it would happen a lot.
The little boy really gives me serious Salem's Lot vibes, like the whole window thing. If you've ever read Salem's Lot, then you know what I'm talking about. But was it a first or second story window that the tapping was going down on?
I'll have to go back and ask them, but I'm going to say it must have been a second story, because if they had an attic, and
likely the bedrooms would be on the second floor.
Stairs, yeah.
I mean, if we're
so
right,
it definitely should have been.
Ugh, creepy. See, now it's really Salem's Lot vibes. Oh my gosh! So the grandpa actually ends up seeing this hand. Like I can totally. You painted a good picture there. It was the peeking hand that was supposed to have the head subsequent after the hand, but that didn't happen. What does the grandpa say after he actually sees this now?
He was like, from my understanding, he was in shock. He knew what he saw. He even asked my uncle, did you see this? And confirmed. But he kind of, I guess, in his own way of, I'm the man of the house, I got to act tough kind of thing. And so it was like, oh, it's nothing. It's nothing. And I think he kind of brushed it off, but he knew that it was happening. And so I'm not sure exactly what became of that. Because later on in life, as a teenager, if we all got together or whatever, somehow ghost stories got brought up, and my grandpa and grandma would be so open with telling, stuff like, oh, I was sitting in the chair. My grandma said she was sitting in this chair and she felt these hands come behind her in the chair and put on her shoulder and push down. And so she reached up her hand to tap the hands, thinking it was my grandpa. And there was nothing there. She turned around, she looked, and there was nobody there. And so then she realized, oh, my grandpa's at work. She's the only one home. And so they were so open with stories like that, but I imagine it took years for them to be that way. Whereas when they were younger, 50s and 60s, a lot of that stuff wasn't really, they knew it happened, but they kind of closed things off. Like, let's not talk about it. Let's just let it go, kind of thing.
So the hands on the shoulders, pressing down, it was almost like a person coming up and placing hands like in a comforting way on someone.
Yes.
Okay.
And she felt the pressure, like they kind of like as if they were about to lean forward, maybe talk to her, or I imagine like a sweet thing, like my grandpa, doing that and reaching over, I love you, or kissing her on the head or something. She placed her hand up on the shoulders to like touch the hands, what she thought was my grandpa, and there was nothing there. She was only touching her own shoulder. So she quickly turned around and looked, and there was nobody there. And then it clicked on her. I'm the only one home. So,
I mean, I guess the phantom hands, at least it was in a comforting way instead of some kind, like if you feel like someone's really trying to press you down, so it would be like, hey, you're not getting up, you're going to stay right here. You know, it wasn't that kind of a situation. So at least there's that.
Yeah, very true.
So your dad, you know, you say he was kind of like, oh no, we're not going to believe in all this. Like his whole side of the family is like that. So especially though, after the revelations around the table about your great grandma via your uncle and your mom, and has he become more open-minded to any of this stuff, or has he ever admitted to having anything happen to him?
If we sit down, if we talk about things and stories get brought up, sometimes, you know, he'll listen to our stories and chuckle a little bit. And then, you know, he kind of just walks away. He has his own little computer room. So he'll go to his computer room and sit in there and do what he does. I think he knows it's real. He acknowledges it's real, but he still does not really talk about it as much as the rest of the family has.
So much like your grandma, kind of just out of sight, out of mind, out of mouth. We're not going to talk about it, and just leave it be.
Yes. Which, with my grandma, I would say, growing up, I guess this is my very first cryptid type of thing. But she was babysitting me and my brother's sister. And matter of fact, it was in that same house, the haunted house. She would threaten us, you know, hey, you guys can go brush your teeth and go to bed, then I'm going to open the windows and the chupacabra is going to come out and eat you. So go to bed. And so she would be like very open telling that story. But as a kid, like when it came to ghost stories or anything paranormal, she wouldn't say nothing. So it wasn't until I was a teenager and older that she would start saying, you know, oh, this happened, this happened, this happened. And then after she would tell the story, things would be quiet again. Because my grandma was very quiet. So I kind of get that impression that it wasn't so much so that she was quiet because that was her normal disposition. I think she was just quiet because maybe in her mind, if you don't speak about things, negative things won't happen.
I mean, do you feel like she actually thought there was some kind of a quote unquote chupacabra outside, or that was just her way of getting you guys to listen?
It makes me think that maybe, you know, even that story was told to her as a kid. I'm not sure. I know, you know, looking into origins of the chupacabra originating from Puerto Rico and somehow stories migrating to Mexico and so forth, that those tales, I'm assuming, have been around a lot longer than I thought. And so for her to mention that to us in the early 80s, it was so real at the time. Like it literally scared us because she was so, the way she told the story, you know, not really much of a story, but the way she told it is, you know, this chupacabra, I'm going to let him in. I'm going to let him eat you. And I remember asking, what's a chupacabra? And she was like, it's like a werewolf, but like a dog. And it's like a mix of both, and it can run real fast, and it can has these long claws, and it'll come in and it'll eat you. And as a kid, the first thought that crossed my mind is the movie Silver Bullet. So, not sure if you remember that movie with Corey Haim.
Mm-hmm. Love that movie.
Gary Busey. Yeah, because of that movie, Silver Bullet, seeing that werewolf and what it did to people, that's where my brain went to as being a chupacabra. Like, I thought a chupacabra was a werewolf, and that it just was a Spanish or Latin version of a werewolf.
Right.
So that was in my head for years because of my grandma. So that was my one and only cryptid experience growing up.
Well, thankfully you didn't see one, though.
No, Yep.
I mean, not the classic one. I'm not talking about the dog with mange. I'm talking about like the really scary version of the chupacabra, which the real one might be the dog with mange, because the goat sucker, the Texas blue dog, that may be the real chupacabra. But the lore and the legends just build up around it so much that it turns into this walking on two legs and, with spikes down its back and all this crazy stuff. But that's what lore is all about, right? And that's what passing stories down is all about. So, yeah. Well, yeah. So what other strange happenings have there been for you or your family?
As a teen living in Southern California, I remember there was a story from my uncle, and basically he had this good friend that would occasionally stay with him in the house, but he was a homeless person, but he would come over for drinks and get some food and stuff like that. He ended up passing away. And so literally maybe a few days afterwards, my uncle and his youngest son, he was probably a little boy, probably about 2 years old, they were taking a nap in his master bedroom. The little boy woke up and he was kind of crying, kind of upset, and he was looking at the door, and my uncle saw him. He's like, what? And then he'd point at the door, and my uncle would look, and there was nothing there. And so somehow my uncle believed in that split second that it was his friend. And so he said out loud, "Hey, it's time for you to go. You're scaring my child. It's time for you to go into the light. Please go into the light." He heard footsteps go down the hallway, and he heard the front door open and close. So he got up and he walked out of the bedroom and he walked to the door. The door was still locked, and it had also a chain lock on it that was still chained. So he couldn't explain hearing a door open and close. So that's one incident. My mom and dad had this big house in Arizona, and my brother and his wife and a couple kids lived there, along with my sister and her husband and a couple of their kids. I was still in the military. I was still married. My then wife and my twin daughters, we paid a visit, and we were sleeping out in the living room on inflatable mattresses. And my sister and her kids got up early for school, and so they were leaving the house. They said goodbye, whatever. They walked out, closed the door, locked it. Probably about 2 minutes after that, there was a little girl's voice, probably 4 feet from my face, that was counting. And she was saying 1, 2, tree. She couldn't pronounce 3. And I sat up and I looked to my left, and there was nobody there. And I'm just sitting there like, what did I just hear? My then wife, she sat up and she was like, what? I go, did you not just hear that? She goes, yeah. She goes, I heard a little girl counting. And we both said 1, 2, 3 at the same time. So she heard it as well. And I'm like, look, there's nobody here. My sister and the kids are gone. And she goes, well, what about your brother and his kids? Like, we're trying to rationalize it. And so I got up, walked down the hallway, knocked on my brother's door. No answer. I can hear him snoring. I walked to the other kids' room and peeked it open, and they were all knocked out. So we were like, what the heck? So we got up. My daughter started waking up, and then my mom came out, and we told her what happened. She's like, oh, yeah, there's something here. I go, what do you mean there's something here? She started telling the stories of, like, they see shadows coming in and out of the hallway and going into the kitchen. And every now and then you can hear the dishes rattling in the drawers in the kitchen. And I'm like, what? I go, but have you heard anything speak? She's like, no, I haven't, but and I don't want to say her name, but my brother's then wife, she had told my mom how she was in the bathroom getting ready for work. She was combing her hair. She heard a little girl behind her saying, F you, B-I-T-C-H. And she turned around thinking it was one of either my sister's daughters or her daughters, somehow, way, shape, or form saying those curse words. And there was nobody there. All the girls were gone. So she couldn't explain it. So it just, yeah.
I wonder why the hostility towards your brother's wife at the time versus you guys hear counting and she hears that. I mean, that's a big difference.
Very big difference. So it almost makes me think it's something mimicking being a little girl, but it's something else. But also at the same time, my brother and his then wife, their kind of marriage ended up becoming toxic. So I don't know if maybe the fights between them two kind of created something,
mm-hmm.
or turned this little girl spirit into something of, what if they're sitting there, in corporeal form, watching things and hearing things, and maybe hearing certain curse words that they shouldn't be hearing, and then repeating things. I think that's far-fetched, but I believe that maybe it was something mimicking a little kid at the time, especially if they were seeing shadows. They weren't seeing any type of like white mist or full body apparitions, but they always explained it as a black mist going down the hallway and into the kitchen and disappearing, along with, the dishes rattling within the drawers. Sometimes the drawers would be pulled out, cupboard doors would be open. So, it was weird.
I mean, again, so we have things moving and rattling. We've got some shadow stuff going on, and this time we have talking. But again, it's mimicking a little bit of the previous activity at other homes. Was there also things that would go missing or move? Things like things that you would use every day that you would really notice was moved?
I'm not sure about that. It's quite possible that may have happened in that house with them, but there were so many people living in the house at that time that
right.
I don't think my sister or brother would even recall or remember if things went missing.
Right, especially that many kids.
My sister might, but
yeah,
right. There was a lot.
You would probably just brush it off as to one of the kids grabbing something, I suppose, at that point, because you have your parents and then two of their kids and then their kids in the home. So yeah, that is a lot of folks in there. Yeah.
Everyone eventually moved out and got their own places, except for my parents. They still stayed in that house. So anytime I would go and visit after my divorce, I would always be like, I just really couldn't sleep in that living room. So my sister had moved into this house that was like fairly new. It was nice. It was repainted, a lot of new appliances. It was just beautiful. But they would start having things happen to where, like, they would hear beeping going on inside the kitchen at night. So they'd walk down the hallway, they would hear the beeping, and they go into the kitchen, and it would stop. There'd be nothing. And so they would sit there and just wait for it to beep again, thinking that maybe it's an alarm, or maybe there was like an alarm on one of the new appliances or something, and nothing. So they'd start to go back down the hallway, and it would start beeping again. And she said it sounded like it was the microwave, but it made no sense that they'd walk in the kitchen, it would stop. So my sister recalled about to walk down the hallway, and there was a light within the kitchen, and it was flickering on and off. So she'd go right back into the bedroom, and she would tell her husband, and he would go out there, and he's, trying to be macho, like, hey, if there's something here, you need to leave. You're not welcome here, and try and brush it off. But there was it kept happening all the time. And even my nieces, they would hear noises coming from the kitchen at night, and so they would always stay in their room. As soon as they went to bed, they would stay in their bed unless they had to go to the bathroom or something. They wouldn't go down the hallway. They wouldn't go into the kitchen for any drinks or late night snacks because they were too afraid to go into the kitchen. And this is like pretty much a brand new house.
Makes you wonder if the whole house was brand new, or they just remodeled the kitchen and put new appliances mostly in that area.
The whole house was, in that section, was pretty much brand new.
In that section. Okay. Yeah, I just wonder if, you hear a lot about remodeling things, sometimes get stuff stirred up. So if the kitchen was kind of the crux of all the demo and the redos, then I wonder if that really got things stirred up. What kind of noises were the nieces hearing that they didn't want to go in the kitchen for late night snacks?
They would hear as if like somebody was moving pots and pans around within a sink, and they would hear either a refrigerator door or some type of door opening and closing. They would hear the beep or beeping, but they never ventured to go down the hallway and go find out, what it is, or if my sister or her husband were up and they were in there. They just knew it was late at night and that most likely it's not their mom and dad. So they couldn't explain it because they didn't attempt to try and figure it out. They're just like, oh, this is happening. This is probably paranormal, and we don't want nothing to do with it. So they they don't know exactly what they were hearing.
Yeah, you can't blame them.
Yeah, I don't blame them at all.
Oh yeah, what else? I mean, I know you've got your UFO stories, but I don't want to like fast forward through things if you have other things that you want to talk about.
So, I guess, it's one of the bigger stories. It's the only time in my life I've ever seen a full-bodied apparition. And the way it happened was a little weird, funny, and weird. Basically, I was still in the Army. I had only been in the Army for maybe a couple of years. As soon as I joined up as an infantryman. Went through basic training, AIT, Fort Benning, Georgia, and then I got stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. As soon as I got there, I was thinking, I'm going to get settled first. I'm going to get an apartment, and then I'll bring my wife and kids. But as soon as I got to my unit, they're like, oh, we're deploying. And I'm like, okay. So we ended up deploying to Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. And it was after the Khobar Towers bombing in 96. and it was to basically take over security as kind of the Air Force failed and what occurred there. After I got back, when you deploy with, fellow soldiers, you become like brothers. And so I had a friend of mine. He was in the same boat as me. He was married. He had kids. But as soon as, we got assigned to Fort Campbell, he couldn't bring them because we were told we were deploying. So I got a place off post. He got housing on post. One day at lunch, we had ran into each other. He's like, "Hey, come over for lunch, man." And I'm like, "Okay, cool." So I went over to his house and I met his wife. We were sitting at the kitchen table, and you can hear the kids down the hallway laughing and playing. From where I was sitting at the kitchen table, if I turned my head to the left, I could see all the way down the hallway. And so I hear the kids running back and forth in the hallway, and I caught a glimpse out of the corner of my eye, them running into one of the rooms. And so I can hear them getting ready to run again. And so I turned my head and I looked, and I see their daughter, this boy, and this other girl. And so I had mentioned to my friend, I'm like, "Hey man, that's great. Your kids sound like they're having fun. They have friends over. I mean, everything's coming together." And him and his wife looked at me like, "Oh, they haven't made any friends yet. School doesn't start till such and such time. So, they've been here." I go, "Yeah, but they have their friend with them." And they're like, "What friend?" I go, "There's a little girl running with them, down the hallway." And they looked at each other, they looked at me, and they're like, "Well, what does she look like?" I go, "Well, she has this white dress on. She has like a red belt, and she has like this red bow in her hair, and it has little streamers like it's going in her hair." And they're like, "There's nobody else here." And I'm like, "Come on." And so the wife got up to walk down the hallway, and me and my buddy looked at each other. He kind of like shrugged his shoulders, like, "Well, let's go look." And so we ended up walking down the hallway, and we got to the room, and she was like, "Hey guys, how you doing?" And they're like, "Fine, Mom." She was saying, "Are you playing? You having a good time?" They're like, "Yeah." She was like, "Oh," she was like, "Do you have a friend over?" And they were quiet. They didn't say nothing. And she got a little mad. She's like, "Excuse me, I asked you a question. Do you have a friend over?" And so the little boy was like, "Mom, yeah, she's so cool. You would like her." And the older daughter was like, "Oh my God, Mom, she's so pretty," and blah, blah, blah. And the mom's like, "Well, what does she look like?" And the little girl, she was like, "Well, she's really pretty. She has this long hair, but she's wearing this white dress with a red belt, and she has this big red bow in her hair." Their parents looked at me, and I was like, "All right, I'm out." And I walked out. And I got to my car, and I got in the car, and I turned it on, and I sat there just for probably 15 minutes, just comprehending what I just saw and comprehending the fact that their own kids explained to a T exactly what I saw.
Mm-hmm.
And, all my life, I have believed in the paranormal. I believed in spirits and ghosts and so forth. But I've never seen a ghost. I've never seen a full-body apparition. And so that day, for some reason, I saw it. And I was like, okay. And I drove home. And I believe I remember probably telling the then wife what happened. But my buddy the next day, he was like, "Hey, you got my wife freaked out." I go, "Hey, it's not my fault." I go, "I thought you had a friend. I thought the kids had friends over." And he's like, "No." I was like, "Man," I was like, "I'm sorry, man. I don't know what to tell you." Over a period of a month, they started hearing things. They'd hear little kids running down up and down the hallway. They would hear the cupboards in the kitchen open and close. And so the wife was so freaked out that she was like, "We need to live off post." So they looked around for an apartment somewhere, and they ended up moving out. And as soon as they moved out of that house, nothing else happened. And then I only saw him for another year, and he ended up being stationed somewhere else.
It makes you.
But it was kind of.
Oh, go ahead.
It was just kind of funny that, when I would see them, I'm like, "So, how are you guys doing?" And they knew what I was trying. I was being kind of sarcastic about that incident, and they would just look at me and shake their head and laugh at the same time. And it was kind of like a running joke, but also a "holy crap, this was real" kind of thing. Yeah, and then they ended up moving, and yeah, there was nothing more after that with that.
It makes you wonder how high of a turnover rate that particular on-base house had, right?
Yeah. Eventually, a few years down the road, I ended up getting housing on Fort Campbell. And it was a fairly kind of new complex, but unfortunately, it's also where I ended up getting exposed to black mold within this house. And so I got sick, was rushed to the hospital quite a few times. My kids were always sick. My then wife would get sick pretty easily. She always ended up with bronchitis every month. And it wasn't until getting ready to leave, we moved out, the movers moved their stuff. And so in the military, when you leave housing, you have to clean everything up to a T. And then an inspector comes. If they agree with everything, they sign off on your out processing paperwork. And then you are cleared to leave. We started cleaning, and so they had that kind of old school type of wall vent that was either an AC or heater. And we couldn't control it. It was base controlled. So if it was winter, the heater was on. If it was summer, the AC was on. So those things were constantly running. I started cleaning them, and I pulled off the shield to the front. And what should have been kind of like a fiberglass type of felt shield there was nothing but green and black mold growing on that. And so I was like, "Holy crap." And I went upstairs, and I went to my daughter's room and my master bedroom. And sure enough, it was the same thing in all those vents. And I'm like, "Nope, this is why we're sick, and I'm just going to pay people to clean and then be cleared." So I paid and got cleared, and we left. And literally a week afterwards, we were fine. My then wife, she got her voice back. The girls weren't sick anymore, and things were great. Wasn't until almost 10 years down the road that other things took a turn, but yeah, sorry, I went off on a little tangent myself now.
That's all right. Now we match, our tangents match. It's fine.
But yeah, it's later on, right before my divorce, I was stationed at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. We lived off post into this house it was fairly kind of old, maybe mid 80s it was built, but it was still nice. It was a nice home. One day I was outside doing lawn work, finishing up. I was getting done. I came into the house, and as I turned left to go into the kitchen, there's this black mist, almost head level with my head, and it shot up into the roof and disappeared. And I couldn't explain it. And I'm like, what the hell did I just see? And I was trying to recreate things. I was like, okay, let me go back outside. Let me come back in. Maybe it was the door casting some shadow. But I knew it was exactly what I was thinking. It was just this black mist, and it just shot upward. And I couldn't explain it. So probably maybe a week or two goes by. I'm sitting in the living room. The wife comes home from work. She walks through the kitchen, and as she was walking more, she's going to the master bedroom. She stops where I can see her, and she's just staring into the bedroom. And I'm like, "Are you okay? What's up?" I just saw something. I can't explain it. I go, "What did you see?" And she said she saw a black mist in our bedroom, kind of hovering off the floor at like head height, just like how I saw it. And then it shot to the right going into the bathroom. So I immediately got up and I went into the bedroom and I was looking around. I didn't see nothing. I go into the bathroom and there was nothing there, but it was freezing cold in the bathroom. I was like, what the heck? And this was summertime in Oklahoma. And it just, the AC worked, but it wasn't that great. And it was just weird how in one part of the house, of all places, that bathroom was really cold. It felt like as if I opened up a refrigerator door. And it ended up being, the last house that me and my then wife stayed in, married. We ended up getting separated and divorced. After I had moved out and then she was moving out, the neighbors, he goes, so you guys moving out? I go, yeah. I go, unfortunately, we're getting separated. We're looking at divorce. And he's like, wow. He goes, you know what? He goes, you guys know that you are the fifth couple to move in there married and then move out getting divorced.
Mm.
And I was like, what? He's like, yeah. He goes, I don't know if it's something about that house, but every time we meet the neighbors and they're in here for, however long and they're married and happy. And the next thing you know, they're getting divorced. And I'm like, how long, are they here till before that happens? They're like, oh, it's like every couple years. Now, when he said a couple years, I was thinking he was thinking, kind of like, the way somebody says, oh, a couple, and you're thinking two, but some people say a couple when they mean more than two, especially in Oklahoma. No offense to Oklahomians. But right when he said that, I realized that it had been 2 years that we had lived in that house before starting to get divorced. It was like 2 years and 1 month. So I don't know. I don't know if there was something within the house that caused a lot of other issues, but I kind of chalked that up to possibly something there influencing, like, whatever the bad part of the marriage was, it increased that.
Mm-hmm.
Increased that negativity.
That's a real bummer because marriage is hard enough without these pesky black mists and negative energies hovering around you and make things worse.
Yes, definitely. It was tough times because I got stationed there after coming back from Iraq. Been through quite a bit there in Iraq and saw some things, been through some things. And when I came back, the then wife, I couldn't speak to her about it. She refused to hear anything about it. So that created like a wedge between us. And I think, the house made it worse. The environment and just things just went south. And it's so weird because she moved out, I moved out, we both moved on. She was in this long relationship with this guy that was just awful. But now she's in this great relationship with this other guy. And I see her as a friend. We talk, we text, and our twin daughters are older, young adults. They're 26. So kind of in terms you would think, oh, you're not married, you're divorced. You don't really have to talk to her anymore because your adult kids are older. There's no need to talk. But we do. I just think it was that house that kind of added like additional negative type of feelings and angst, and just it made things worse.
Yeah, it's a bummer that there's not a disclaimer on houses like that, right? They have to disclose if there's been murders and things like that in a home, but there's no paper trail for the paranormal.
Yeah, exactly. Although I wouldn't be surprised if there was something on Craigslist, like you had mentioned earlier.
Right.
Someone saying, hey, you want a quick way to get out of your marriage? Here's a paranormal house that might help bust up the negativity and help you out.
Annoyed with your husband or wife? I have the place for you. This will expedite everything real quick. Just get the lawyer ready. Yeah. Well, let's say we switch gears and move into a little bit of UFO talk.
I have had only one UFO experience, and that's so weird that you mentioned that. Another synchronicity popped in my head. I've only had one experience, and that was I was a teenager. We were living in this brand new 2-story house in Southern California, on the outskirts or in between the towns of Riverside and Moreno Valley. I had my bed against this windowsill that had a ledge. Like if somebody wanted to put like cushions on this ledge, you can literally do it. Kind of like, I don't even know what that's called, but it just reminds me of like old school, not even old school. God, I feel old. It reminds me of like movies and TV shows where people would have this open space below a window where they can sit and read a book or, chill out. There was enough room there for that. I remember I woke up one night and it was cold in my room and my window was open. I had fell asleep with it open. So I got up and I lifted up my blinds and I'm getting ready to close my window. And off to my left, I see this bright ball of light. And it was probably a good distance away from me, but it was bright enough to where I can see it. And it was hovering, but then it started zigzagging left and right, up and down, just kind of zigzagging. And I'm like, what the hell is that? And it got to a point where it stopped and it kind of lowered itself a little bit, and then it stopped again. And then these little ball of light shot downward from it. And I cannot explain, for the love of my life, how to explain that other than if, say, somebody got flares, and if they lit the flares up and then dropped them at the same time, there was like maybe between 15, 20 of these things just dropping downward. But as they drop downward from this overall big ball of light, then the lights of those little things would just go away. So in my mind, I'm trying to rationalize, okay, is this the military even though the nearest military base is like 30 miles away, and there's no sound. And where this ball of light was is a community. It's a, normal neighborhood, probably 5 miles away from me. I just couldn't explain it. And so after the little balls falling down disappeared, the big ball light started moving upward slow, and then it shot up into the sky and disappeared. And I thought, what the hell did I just watch? There was no sound. There was no noise. Even later in life, joining the military, especially being at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, home of the Air Assault Division, and riding in helicopters, I know the sound of them. I know whether they're far away, they're near. There was nothing. So I couldn't explain it, especially the light shooting upward and into the sky and disappearing.
And how fast did that shoot upward? I mean, faster than anything you'd ever seen, essentially?
Yes. Like it was slow enough to know that it was going upward, but fast enough to where it just literally in a matter of a second, it disappeared as it shot upward. And it was a clear night. There was no clouds in the sky. So I would think if it was a helicopter somehow, way, shape, or form, I would see blinking lights. I would see, maybe hear it come overhead, something, but there was nothing. It just shot up and disappeared. And so that I was probably about 13, 14 years old at the time. Fast forward to last year, me and a couple of friends are, contemplating putting a vodcast together. And we had planned out different topics that we would discuss and so forth. One of them was going to be UFO, and I was going to tell that story. But it was further ahead. Like it wasn't, currently in that schedule. I went and took a shower, and I came out of the shower, and I'm watching TV. And one of the shows on at the time was Travel Channel. What was it? Paranormal Caught on Camera, I believe is the name of the show. There's this guy explaining how he saw this UFO and that he took a video of it. And so I'm sitting there on my bed, I'm getting dressed, and I'm looking at the TV. He took a video of exactly what I saw as a little kid. Exactly, to a T. No sound. It was a hovering light, and then these little balls of light come shooting downward out of it. And then the big ball of light kind of shoots away and disappears. And he couldn't explain it. As the video editing starts going and going, it says that he's from Fontana, California, and that's where he saw it. And so given where he saw it and where I lived at that time, he was basically a 25-minute drive northwest of me. And he saw the exact same thing, only he got it on camera.
Well, that's odd.
Very odd. And so I remember I was just like excited, and I told my friends, I'm like, oh my God. I never thought in my life that somebody would have seen what I saw and then video record it. And I had already told them the story beforehand, long before. So they already knew what I was trying to describe. So when I said, hey, now there's a video, and I sent it to them, they're like, holy crap, this is what you saw? I'm like, yes. There is a corroboration with somebody who I don't know in a town that's less than 25-minute drive north of where I lived at the time. And he saw the same exact thing.
One of the hosts of that show, of course, is Derek Hayes of Monsters Among Us podcast. But, the formula of that show is they'll show these the videos, and then the host will try to break them down provide some kind of an explanation. So do you remember what the hosts of the show ended up saying about that video?
I just briefly remember them trying to explain it themselves, and I believe the host was trying to say it almost like looks like little flares coming out of an object that you can't really see, except for like maybe a light. And as the objects are falling down, like rain, is like what he said, they disappear. And then he couldn't make sense of it. He couldn't rationalize it either, or explain it, or explain what it could be. I'm not sure if they talked about military tactics, but there's no way, being former military and having rappelled out of a Black Hawk helicopter many times, there's no sense or reason to have, let's just say, a chem light or flashlight on my person as I'm exiting the helicopter. And even if I did, it wouldn't be a fast exit downward. It would be a rappel. These things coming downward were straight downward. There was no movement left to right. It was like a down. It's kind of hard to explain. It's like if a flare can be still lit within water, and water flows downward like out of a faucet. It was straight downward pretty quickly. It was like at least 15 to 20 of them, and then it stopped. And like before they even got close to the ground, the light disappeared from them, whatever they were. So it was just weird.
I mean, that's a cool sighting, but it's even better when there's not only corroboration, but the corroboration is coupled with a video of exactly what you saw. So that's awesome.
Yeah, like over 20 something years later, almost 30 something years later, there's a video, and I was just floored. And so I'm like, holy crap, this is exactly what I saw. That is my only UFO experience. I know my mom and my grandpa had one. When she was a little kid, they were driving back from something. And so she was sitting up front with my grandpa as he was driving. My grandma, one of my aunts, and my uncle were sleeping in the back seat. And at some point, my mom had looked up and she saw this light. And she just thought, it's a light off in the distance, maybe a house or something. But then the light started moving. And so she remembers telling my grandpa, "What's that light?" And he's like, "I don't know." And so they were looking at it, and it was zigging across the road and back and forth. And she said that it kind of darted upward, and then the light went out and it disappeared. I had never heard that story until after my brother's funeral. But those are the only two UFO type experiences within our family.
So do you have anything happening now that makes you still wonder if there actually is a generational curse in your family?
I would say, so I do have activity that happens almost daily in my house. And it's not anything negative. I will say that I do believe that there is possibly a little girl spirit attached to me. I believe because of a personal relationship that I have with somebody, we lost a child that wasn't born yet. And so ever since then, I just kind of feel like there's possibly some type of female childlike spirit around me. there was one instance where I'm sitting in the living room watching TV, and there's these little game cases in the coffee table that started moving. And so without me reacting, I was still watching TV. I pulled out my phone and I took some burst shots on my iPhone. And of all the burst shots, there was about 20 of them. Only one of them has something like a white mist, and it's right by the game cases where I heard it was rattling. It was only in one frame. It was probably about thigh high for me. I'm only 5'9", so it's probably 3 to 4 feet off the ground. So every now and then I get that sense and feeling. After I retired and I started working for the government again, my office was in the original hospital for what was called Fort Lewis, Washington. I started hearing stories from other coworkers about how the office was haunted. While working there for the year I was working there, there was more uptick in my own home, to the point where I would hear, "Hey," in my ear at like 5 a.m. I would hear laughing. I would hear some little bit of talking, but nobody obviously in my room. I'd go out my door. I have one daughter that lives with me. She's knocked out. She's not talking to anybody. I have a desk in my master bedroom with a chair, obviously. And so every night I tuck that chair in. And one morning I woke up and the chair was against my bed. And so from the desk to my bed is probably 5 feet. So somehow, way, shape, or form, this chair moved out of the desk and then came up to my bed and was literally against the bed. There was one night I was working really late. It was probably 9 o'clock at night, but I was working, trying to send this appeal on behalf of a soldier who's being medical boarded out of the military. And the appeal was due that night. And I was the last person in the office. I started locking up. I was turning off the lights on the second floor. I moved down to the first floor to exit the building. And jokingly, knowing that I'm the only one in the building, I said, "All right, good night." And I hear, "Okay." And I thought, "Oh, there's somebody else here?" I was like, "Oh, who's here? Hello?" And there was nothing. I walked down the hallway and I'm like, "Hello?" And there's only one female that worked on that hallway. And the voice sounded like an older female. And so I went to her office. The lights are off. Everything is off. I went to the bathrooms. I knocked and entered, and the lights were off. Nobody was in there, either one of them. And I thought, okay, time to go. And I got to the front door, and I exited the door, and I was locking up the door, and I saw the light flicker in the hallway. And I thought, okay. And I just stood there for, about 15, 20 seconds. I didn't see nothing. And I turned around, started heading to the parking lot, and my car was the only car there. There was no cars around at all. And I left and I came back home. After I stopped working in that building and in that job, all the little haze and talking and the desk chair stuff, all that stuff stopped. So I don't know if it was something residual from that house kind of following me home, I guess, for a year. But luckily that part has stopped. Because getting that little hay in your eardrum 5 o'clock in the morning is pretty annoying.
Yeah, I wouldn't like that very much. There's boundaries to these things. There should be at least, and that would be one of them
Yes.
for sure. We of course were talking about some things before, we got to the official portion for the show, and I'm so sorry for all the things that you've been through. You guys have you've been through a lot. Your family's been through a lot, and yeah, I'm sorry about all that stuff. And then you've got the little girl, and golly, I don't even know. That's a whole lot to process for any one person, I would hazard to say. So, but I thank you so much for coming on and being willing to talk about all this stuff.
I thank you. I thank you for having me on, and it's always good to talk about some things. I feel like it's kind of like a normal thing for me to talk about. I have no problems talking about, even if they get in depth and personal. But thank you, and I truly appreciate it. It's been a tough life, especially the last year has been pretty tough with the loss of my older brother. But all we can do is put one foot forward and just work on each day, one day at a time.
And of course, before you go, again, thank you so much for being one of my Patreon members. That means a lot to me.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Appreciate having you having me